Welcome to the RCR Mobilist series. I'm Martha DeGrasse. Our topic today is Connected Cities, LTE Public Safety Networks. I'm joined today by RCR's Kelly Hill. She's the author of a recent feature report on the FirstNet Nationwide Public Safety Network. Also joining me will be wireless industry veteran Andy Seybold. Also Terrence Brooks, Director of Custom Solutions for Sprint, and James Silk. He's Product Marketing Manager for Handheld Devices at Rohde Schwarz. Rohde Schwarz is our sponsor today. Kelly, we're going to start with you. You're going to update us a little bit on some recent developments. I know that the government has made some big changes in the public safety area this year, and I know that your feature report goes over a little bit of that. Can you bring us up to speed?
Sure. Well, we had the FirstNet board announced in late August, and that has been a long-awaited announcement. This gives us the first look at what the leadership is going to be for this board that's going to basically determine the shape of this nationwide network. It's a 15-member board, and so we got the names of 12 of those members. 3 of them were already known. We actually just this week found out that their first meeting is going to be September 25th. And so at that meeting, we'll start to get a sense of, what they're going to tackle first and some of the bylaws and operational things as to how this board is going to operate.
So Kelly, obviously an important development, but what does it mean for the municipalities that had already gotten started with some of their own public safety networks and even invested there? What will they do now?
Well, the vast majority of them are kind of in limbo right now until they get more clear guidance from FirstNet on whether or not they're going to be allowed to move forward with their network investment. There's one jurisdiction, Harris County, Texas, that has said that it plans to move forward under temporary authority from the FCC to go ahead and start operating. But they're really the only ones that have said that they're going to try and move ahead with plans as FirstNet is getting started. The rest seem to be waiting to see which direction FirstNet is going to go.
And what about the funding? $7 billion, obviously it sounds like a lot, but is that enough to get started and keep going, or what will be needed going forward for FirstNet, do you think?
Most of the folks that I talked to pretty much feel that $7 billion is not going to be enough. It's going to be enough to get things started and to get the planning phase underway, to get network design, and to start a build-out. But it really doesn't address the ongoing cost of operations. FirstNet is supposed to be a model where public safety does pay for access, but nobody knows exactly how that's going to work. The only people I talked to for the report who did think that $7 billion was going to be enough was Motorola. But everybody else kind of said, to really get a robust network out there, we're going to need more than that, and how that's going to happen is up in the air.
All right. Well, I know one gentleman who's been very much on the inside with all this is Andy Seybold, and he's going to join us now. Andy, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
I know that you've worked a lot on Capitol Hill, gone over a lot of these issues, and I'd like to start off by asking you about the need for cell sector capacity. You were telling me before we started that that was an important point and that you had spent a lot of time going over that. So I'd like to try to share some of your thoughts on that with our viewers today.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to tell you that the activities on Capitol Hill were amazing because it was all public safety communities, police, fire, EMS, everybody coming together and working the Hill and working with the executive branch and the FCC. It became clear that the opponents of the D block, the people that wanted it to go to auction, were putting details out there as far as the capacity of the network, saying with the small public responder community, we really didn't need 10 by 10, but they were using formulas that you use to calculate the total capacity of a network across the cities or across an area rather than specific cell sector. When we got involved, what we did was we came up with a rationale that most incidents will happen within a single cell sector, so that the amount of capacity, the amount of data available must be sufficient within a single cell sector. We then ran tests up in Alameda County on some actual LTE spectrum, and it was a 5x5 network, and we flooded the network with half the video that we really wanted for an incident. We had 3 different incidents. One was a hostage situation, one was a multiple vehicle accident, and one was a fire with casualties. And we ran out of spectrum very, very quickly. From that, we published a report that then we used with Congress and we used with the executive branch and the FCC that said, look, the only way you can calculate capacity for public safety is on a cell sector by cell sector basis. And Martha, that was one of the things, one of many things that helped convince Congress and everybody else that public safety really needed the D block.
Excellent. Well, let's walk through the economics just a little bit. I know that we touched on that a little bit a minute earlier, and I'm hoping that you can share your perspective on the rollout and then the need for the public-private partnerships that may be able to keep it going.
Okay, let's talk about the cost of the network. Can it be built for $7 billion? I don't believe it can. Is the number double that? Is it more than that? I don't know. Kelly made a very good point. FirstNet has to not only build the network, they have to maintain it and they have to operate it. It's LTE. It's not just a single build. It's going to have to be built over time. It's going to have to be filled in. We're going to have to do in-building and everything else. So the way to do it is to build out as much as we can for the $7 billion and then get involved in public-private partnerships. Now, FirstNet is allowed to use public-private partnerships. We don't know how they're doing it or going to do it. One of the models that I've been working on in rural America is using rural power co-ops who are sitting on a lot of money, using rural telephone companies who would use it for their own use, and they would resell it to their customers because we have capacity. The one issue I'm concerned about is I'm not sure we have capacity in the major metropolitan areas for network sharing. So we're going to have to see. What are the economics? It's got to be self-sustaining. The government says that. How much can we charge each user and each device? There's some information on this slide that talks about, if we have devices on the office or in the car, if we're charging $40 a month, that vehicle is $120 a month. If you have a fire engine, it's a lot more than that. So there are other costs that cities and FirstNet and states are going to have to deal with. For example, LTE systems transmit 24/7 as opposed to public safety today where you only transmit when you need to. The electric utility bills are going to be higher. The backhaul to and from each site are going to require very high-speed microwave and or fiber. And the devices aren't going to be $99 devices. There are going to be some hardened devices that will cost $400 or $500. When we start marrying them with P25 devices, the costs will go up. The interesting thing to me is we don't have to have hardened devices for everybody in public safety, just the people on the street. The administrators and everybody else will, in fact, be able to use a standard smartphone that's been outfitted to be on the public safety spectrum.
I think that is very interesting. We've seen a lot of news in that area with software that enables the commercially available LTE phones to be used for secure situations like that. Now, Andy, I know that you've talked a little bit about the utilities just a minute ago, and you made a comment to Kelly earlier about ways that the utilities can share in the costs and the benefits of public safety LTE networks. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things that I did with Congress is I looked at a district. In fact, I looked at a district where we had a congressional representative who was not in favor of the D block, and we did an analysis of how much rural area was in their district. And then I mapped that with the rural power co-ops and the rural telephone companies in that district. And then I put together a model that said, okay, we use the high tension lines for from the electric company for cell sites. We use the backhaul. They've got feet on the street. They've got trucks out there. Same thing with the rural cellular carriers. They help build it. They help fund it. They use it for smart grid, they use it for their own meter reading, they use it for their own cells, and then they resell it to the rural community of America on a secondary basis. Let's be clear, if public safety needs it, they preempt, all right, but on a secondary basis. Now, what this does is two things. It gets the network in rural America where we really need it, and it gets the people in rural America broadband they don't have today. So it's a win-win for everybody.
That does sound like a win-win. All right, and finally, can you just talk a little bit more about the role that you see for the carriers in this?
Well, it depends. There's a lot of rumors, and we don't know about FirstNet. But when I look at modeling of what you do with $7 billion, so one of the things is, first of all, I'm telling public safety, get involved with the carriers today. Learn about 4G. Understand that in an emergency it's not going to be available. But the devices are available and you can get your feet wet and you can learn. As the FirstNet network comes on board, and here's the thing, let me give you a construction model. And this is not from FirstNet, it's just off my head, okay? If we contracted with 3 or 4 commercial network operators to build out the network, and if they all use site sharing and they all co-located public safety, that $7 billion would go a lot further than if we try to build a network without that type of cooperation.
I think that's a key point. Okay, I want to go ahead and put your information up for everybody, Andy, to let everybody see how to contact you, and we're glad that you're going to be able to stay with us for the rest of the program. At this time, we'd like to ask Terrence to join us. Terrence is here today from Sprint. Good morning, Terrence. How are you?
Hey, good morning, guys. How you doing?
Great, thank you. Terrence, I know that you've also prepared a presentation for us, and if you're ready, we'll go ahead and go through that.
Yeah, hey, thanks. So first off, thanks for having me here, and for those that are watching, congratulations to the FirstNet board members. I think that was a critical step in order to move this initiative from legislation to now to a point where we can start to see some actual movement with it. So congratulations to those folks. I'm here today to just give you an update on where we see it, where we think Sprint can play with the FirstNet initiative. And if we go to the next slide, it really talks about where we are from a network vision perspective. So what we're doing here at Sprint is we're building an all-new network whereby we're taking the disparate infrastructure we had around our CDMA and IDEN infrastructure, and we're coalescing that into one single multimodal base station type technology where we can propagate our current frequencies over a single base station supported by the radio access network vendors at the tower. What this gives us from our standpoint is a much more efficient network. From a user standpoint, it gives you higher call quality, increased data speeds, things of that nature. And we're utilizing this network utilizing this initiative to roll out our LTE network as well. So we currently announced that we have 19 markets out there, and in the coming months we'll have more than 100 markets out there with LTE. So we're progressing, and we have this evolution that you see demonstrated on the screen, by which we're taking advantage of LTE today and have a network that will allow us to take advantage of some of the future iterations of LTE near term, more specifically LTE Advanced, and also around our push-to-talk platform. And we've been very fortunate here at Sprint, given our legacy with public safety around our IDEN push-to-talk solution, our rebanding around 800, where we feel like we have a lot of expertise and knowledge about how public safety would like to use not only the voice component of it, but also the data component, which is going to be the initial iteration of this network. So we feel very excited about this network platform we have here at Network Vision to allow for that to happen. And FirstNet could take advantage of our infrastructure and be able to get to market a little bit quicker than if they were to go at it alone. Back to Andy's point before, we really feel like a true partnership between the carriers and with FirstNet is going to be critical to getting that $7 billion to where it needs to be. And we totally agree. If you're going to look at a greenfield build and all the things that we have experience around, you're going to be challenged with $7 billion. But really feel like if you were to partner with the carriers, there is an opportunity to stretch that a lot farther, and we feel at Sprint with our network vision platform that we can stretch it even further than some of the initial estimates may think. The next two slides really talk about some of the solutions that we have around public safety. Given our expertise, there are things that we do with the police vehicles, embedded modems, a couple of applications that you see listed on the screen, and really feel like leveraging a commercial network for some of the things that you're doing today, and then maybe in the future, as the critical nature of a national emergency, hurricane, whatever it may be, utilizing the dedicated spectrum that FirstNet is going to have. Video is going to be a huge one that takes up a lot of bandwidth. Back to Andy's point, 5x5, a lot of people on it. It's not going to be able to accommodate all the things you're going to want to do, and we feel like that's maybe an area where the commercial carrier networks can actually play. So video surveillance is a big thing, as well as some of the applications you see here listed on the screen. And then the next slide talks about what we have from an emergency preparedness standpoint. And the graphic you see in the bottom right is one of our SAT quotes, satellite cell on light truck, by which we have pretty much everything that I mentioned from a network vision perspective located on this truck. So if there's an emergency where towers have been knocked down, we could deploy these type of assets, and we have these readily available today to really help out in those state and local government type of emergencies, and that's core to what we do, and we've been doing it here for a long time. So in summary, from a Sprint perspective, we really feel like a bottoms-up approach is going to be the best approach to take. But the state, local entities is going to be critical to make sure that we understand all the needs that are going to be that need to be accomplished here with the FirstNet initiative. And without that bottoms-up approach, without those entities giving their input, we're not going to be able to accomplish what ultimately they're going to need. We don't want to have this be a top-down approach. We really do want to get that feedback. And here at Sprint, we encourage those local entities to take advantage of the funding that's available to plan, provide feedback, and really be engaged. So Sprint's been here. We continue to see opportunities in the public safety space, and really feel like network vision allows for some opportunities to progress this project even quicker to the market than initially anticipated.
All right, Terrence, thank you very much. Now, the devices are obviously an important part of this, as are the different overlapping networks, and we're going to hear about both of those from James Silk. He is with Rohde Schwarz, our sponsor. James, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you for being here. Your presentation is here, and we're ready to start whenever you are.
Okay, if you could go ahead, that'd be great. So a way to kind of wrap our arms around the public safety network was broken down and very well presented in a paper by Leonard Miller of NIST. The idea was to break the network down into chunks, starting as low as the personal area network, moving to the incident area network, moving on to a jurisdictional area network, and the extended area network. So if we go to the next slide, Martha, it kind of talks a little bit about all the different area networks and the devices in them. So you kind of start with the personal first responder, be it a police officer, firefighter, medic, move up to where you have now an incident commander for a situation, and that incident commander may also need to put up a temporary network, and move up to jurisdictional area networks where you now tie into the PSTN, and the extended area network where you've got all your regional, state, national, and network resources all tied into one. If we were to look at this, we could actually break this down into 3 different scenarios that I'd like to talk about. The first scenario would be a heart attack. So a firefighter, medic, responding to the first call. The second scenario would be a building or a house fire, and the third scenario would be a police officer traffic stop. So if we were to go through the first scenario, which is the heart attack, throughout the scenario you have the ambulance, the paramedic team, and the patient. They're all tracked by network providing geolocation in real time. you have all the patient information and vitals. They're recorded through wireless monitors and voice recognition systems, so they're not really tied to paper reports and notes. All the EMS hospital staff orders as well as paramedic treatments recorded on the network. Anything happening at the hospital is also recorded there and in the ambulance there by their respective databases. All the monitors and devices used with the patients, like I said, are wireless. They allow easy patient transport and mobility. All the conversations between the dispatcher and the paramedics are also a conference call where you've got simultaneous multi-user full duplex discussions. You also now have your next generation call center, and the next generation call center can make the determination if they need to go to the closest hospital or a hospital that would be one that would be tied to whatever the emergency response was. The next scenario, fire in the residential building area. So throughout this scenario, you again have your fire personnel, your EMS support personnel, and the fire victims all tracked by the network, providing geolocation in real time and providing the incident commander with the current accountability of all the public safety personnel and the fire resources. The victim information and vitals are recorded through wireless monitors, just as we did before, and the voice recognition system, again, takes us off reliance on paper reports and notes. All the fire personnel and equipment have monitors to measure not only their vital signs, but the conditions in the environment. So you now have the network, network tied to the GIS. And the GIS, now the tie is to generate some type of information so we know where...
Hey, come on, it's all about you now.
We know where, what the building looks like when our responders show up on scene. And we can also now track the firefighters, medics, and a electronic rendering downloaded from the GIS. Moving on to the last scenario, which would be a law enforcement traffic stop. Throughout this scenario, you now have the webcam activated on the police vehicle. Any equipment that's needed with the arrested suspect, it's tracked by the network, providing geolocation on the officer in real time. This allows the field supervisor as well as dispatch current accountability of all personnel. You also have monitors on the police officer that are tied to not only his physiological status, which would be his heart rate, but also to the vehicle, which could be a sensor in the shotgun rack, as well as a sensor on the police officer, where if he pulls his weapon, now all backup is sent code 3, lights and sirens going to provide support as quickly as possible. All the suspect information and evidence are recorded through wireless monitors. Again, voice recognition system, all the information is tagged and tracked with the officer's identification code. All evidence is tracked with RFID tags to provide an audit trail. All law enforcement personnel and equipment have monitors to measure the vital conditions status that's reported by the personal area network as well as the incident area network. And you now have ties into the national state criminal justice records and civilian records to gather information on the person that was stopped. You can also download APHIS information to make sure that that subject that's now in custody is actually who he claims to be. So I think if we go on to the next slide, Martha, and kind of take a look at how all this is coming together. There you go. So this is the slide that's really going to kind of give us an encapsulation of where we're going with the LTE network. Is it going to be complicated? Well, yeah, because you now have different area networks. You now have a next generation call center. You have next generation emergency services, and you have next generation law enforcement. Make sure that that police officer goes home at the end of the shift. This is all tied into the government information system that supplies data. And we talked through the 3 scenarios, and I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to the folks that are making this happen. So if we could look at the next slide. So, I mean, this is being driven by a very group of talented people at the Public Safety Communications Research Group. We have Cameron, Joel, Emil, Andy Thiessen, Ken, NTIA. We've got Al Vincent, Dr. Rob Stafford, NIST. We've got Patrick Gallagher, and like I said, the person that kind of came up with all this, these ideas was Leonard Miller of NIST. So the whole end result of this would be you have a marriage of public safety. You have that tied to the federal government, who is actually driving and will be tied very tightly to FirstNet. And with all these folks that bring this all together, I think you have a marriage that I think will make for a successful deployment once we get there.
Well, let's hope so. That sounds great. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. So I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about the devices that are going to be part of the public safety network. We've heard a little bit about the possibility of commercial smartphones being used by first responders and other operators in the public safety network, but I'd like to start with Andy and get each of your perspectives on that.
All right. Well, I think, first of all, we're going to have, excuse me, multiple generations of devices over a very short period of time. The first devices will be USB dongles, they will be modems mounted in vehicles, and they will provide data and video services. We also have seen at APCO and other conferences the start of handheld LTE devices. So we will have a generation of LTE devices, handheld, that resemble smartphones, but they will have some hardening and other types of things. And a person in the field will end up carrying two devices. Then we will start on an integration process. Now, the issue at this point for me is, are we going to have voice over this network? And my belief is not for a very, very long time, not for 10 years, because it has to be mission critical. It has to be on and off network. There are lots of things going on. The PSCR is working with 3GPP, the standards group. They take eons to get things done. So my belief is that the next generation device will be an LTE device married with a P25 analog FM device in the 700-800 megahertz band or some other band, and that in 2015-16, that's the kind of devices we'll be using. The price will be lower than a P25 device, but higher than today's cell phones.
Okay, James, what's your perspective on that, the devices? Are we 10 years from voice?
You know what? I don't think so. I think we're much closer. I think if you talk to some of the folks at the FCC and some of the other organizations, the thought is we're at the most 5 years off. I think there's testing now to get point-to-point and point-to-net working sooner rather than later. And I think with the movement to P25, Tetra, LTE, you already see gateways that are being put out by Motorola, Harris, Tate. I think you see things going into the vehicles now that will be able to handle both video and the data required to be successful, and hopefully talk around application in 3 to 5 years versus 10.
Martha, can I make a comment on that?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. There are gateways, but if you look today, one of the things that's a big concern is Sprint's push-to-talk, Verizon's push-to-talk, and AT&T's push-to-talk are all proprietary. If you move them into the LTE network, we're going to have an interoperable nightmare at this point. What I believe, and maybe you're right, Terrence, James, that we'll get there in 5 years. I think that's way too optimistic. But the issue is there has to be a network standard. There has to be a network standard that can be adhered to, and if it's going to be used on and off network, it has to be common across all the commercial vendors as well as across public safety.
Okay, excellent point. All right, let's talk a little bit about security, specific challenges that FirstNet will face in this area. Terrence, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. And Sure. Just to follow up on the last question.
Absolutely.
I would totally agree on the device standpoint. You will start to see more of that hardened dongle type device, and then you'll see the iterations go. With regards to the standards, I know the carriers are rolling out release 9 and 10 of LTE today, and back to Andy's point about standards groups. We think the voice components probably won't start being standardized across LTE, at least at a carrier perspective, probably release 13, 14. But in the meantime, I would agree that interoperability piece is going to be key, and I know that our Chief Network Officer, Bob Osby, worked with the FCC on some of that interoperability language that hopefully will be taken into consideration what happens here. Back to your question of some of the challenges that are going to be faced. I think one of the initial ones is going to be just the feedback. Having everyone agree on what the requirements are going to be. It goes from saying, hey, I need a very hardened site on the coastal communities area, to maybe some of the more rural areas are saying, hey, I just need to have broadband, and the worst thing that's going to happen to me is I'm going to have a tornado, but I need to have a deployable asset. And those are some of the things that we can provide. So I think the feedback piece is going to be the biggest thing, or we're going to need everyone from the bottoms up really providing feedback on what they need. If we can have that feedback go back to FirstNet, I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that's going to make sure that everyone's needs are taken care of. I think a lot of the technical challenges and things of that nature, we can figure those things out, but just making sure that all the proper needs are met at that state and local level, that's going to be the biggest thing that we're going to need to have happen.
Okay, Andy, do you have any comments on security?
Well, security is going to be a very, very big deal. This network must be more secure than commercial networks. It has to be secure from day one. It has to meet all the federal requirements and then some. And it has to be disconnectable from the wired internet instantaneously. We cannot afford to have one of the things that the network operators do very, very well is they can isolate their network from the internet very, very quickly and very efficiently. We need the same thing. If you look at a lot of organizations, including the federal government, they have so many wired connections to the internet that they couldn't get off the internet in 2 days, let alone 2 seconds. So that's one of the things that's very concerning to me. But, the FBI, Sprint, Verizon, Qualcomm, everybody, PSCR, everybody understands that this network must be the most secure wireless network ever built in this country.
Okay, that is interesting. Terrence, do you have anything to add to that, the ability to get off the internet instantaneously? That must be something that you have some experience with.
Yeah, we do, and it just comes down to making sure that you have a technology that's available to operate off network, so to speak. So I would agree that the security piece is going to be critical here, and would also agree that you're going to need the solution that is going to operate in times where everything else is down. You're going to still need to have this up. So whatever those connectivity options are going to be, if that's off network geographically over LTE, having devices that can do that is going to be critical.
Okay, that sounds like it's going to be a challenge. Now, James, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your perspective, not only on security, but also on some of the testing that is part of bringing devices and networks up to speed in the public safety LTE space. Can you take us through that just a little bit?
Sure. So going along kind of with what Andy said and Terrence said, I think one of the things about FirstNet is that we have so much leverage to build up off of from the already commercial networks, Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. So much of the LTE testing and kind of the falling, over the issues will have been done by the commercial network operators. So I think that would give us somewhat of a leg up and a pretty good idea on how to handle a lot of the security issues, because our network operators are already experiencing those right now. In talking about what to do testing-wise, I think the priorities that we need to expect to have happen in FirstNet. In other words, how does FirstNet optimize reliability of the FDD network while still deploying as fast as possible? FirstNet's priority is going to have to be interoperability. I think Andy already touched on that. Terrence talked about that. You need to have interoperability between real UEs and the real infrastructure. And what does this mean? It really means you have some type of IoT testing, first done in a lab, then go out and do in the live network. I think also for FirstNet, drive testing is going to be mission critical. A paper written by Andy talks about the marriage of utilities and public safety, and the way to leverage some of that cost and amortize that across the nation using existing hard sites from utilities, I thought was brilliant on Andy's part. So we need that reliability in a public safety network. But now when we're talking about new UEs, I think this will be testing that's never been done in the public safety network before, because with FDD 14 devices, they need to be good, they need to be reliable. We're now looking at testing protocol stacks, RF parametric performance, antenna performance, data performance. You have RF, RRM protocol conformance for FDD 14, compliance with over-the-air and custom tests built around the unique challenges involved in FDD 14. You're talking about new compliance and conformance tests that really these devices cannot fail because of the testing that's been done. So I think when we do deploy, we have to make sure that we're putting out a bulletproof network and bulletproof UEs.
Right, and the time involved in creating a bulletproof network is potentially more than some people may realize. What do you think about the time frame for the nationwide public safety network?
Well, I mean, I think I would go with Andy, and I think the network is going to be challenging, but I don't think it's insurmountable. Especially, like I said, if you look at Andy's paper, we talked about the marriage of utilities and public safety. You have utilities stretched across areas where the only thing needing reception would be sheep and goats and maybe cows, and that's, I mean, the utilities are going out there with hard lines now. You can throw up different types of sites that would stretch as far as they can, but LTE is and Andy could probably tell you that the LTE network compared to the existing P25 and maybe new coming Tetra deployments, you're looking at many more base stations than we had with the existing analog, where you have a boomer site, and if you can't get reception, you just crank up power. If you crank up power at an LTE base station, you just inject more noise into the network, and things actually get worse than better. So I think so much that we've learned from the network deployments that we're seeing now with LTE can be leveraged to help mitigate any long-term deployments that would have to happen for public safety.
All right, and thinking about the base stations, to what extent can infrastructure be shared, in your opinion? How much infrastructure needs to be really proprietary to a public safety network?
Well, the whole idea, is it just me again, Martha?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I think the whole idea behind P25 and Project Mesa would be to make this network as transparent as possible. And the whole idea is to have things that can be easily deployed using commercial off-the-shelf devices, non-proprietary pieces sitting on top of either P25 or Tetra. And I think it's something that certainly, again, can be done sooner rather than later.
Okay, Terrence, I'd like to hear your perspective on this as representing Sprint.
Yeah, sure. So if you look at, this entire ecosystem, as I like to call it, at the very top you have, your site locations, you have the towers, things of that nature. I think those are some of the things that you can share as part of that public-private partnership. If you go to the critical elements around the core, the IMS, the content, I think those are likely things that public safety is going to want to own, manage, and maintain, either with a premise-based core or cloud-based core or something totally separate from the carrier piece. But I think a lot of the physical assets in the field can be shared. I think also back to the point made earlier around where they've hardwired a lot of connectivity, I think some of the backhaul or access is probably something that can be shared as well. And then to also reiterate, given our investment in this all-new network here at Sprint with Network Vision, we feel like that allows some leverage for FirstNet to utilize that infrastructure, that technology to deploy things a lot quicker in terms of a time frame. If that's a year, 2 years, 3 years, not exactly sure, but we have some assets today, and we have a technology today that can be leveraged to quickly deploy 700 versus having it be a totally parallel network. So really feel like some of the field assets can be shared, and maybe the access piece, and really looking at the core elements being something that public safety would own, manage, and maintain.
Okay, great. So a lot of infrastructure can be shared. Andy, I'd like to ask the next question of you. I know that some people have just said, well, why can't a public safety network just piggyback on the commercial carriers? And I think that's something that you can address.
Yeah, we were asked that question over and over and over again in Congress. We were asked that question by the FCC. There are three elements to this. First of all, the network operators stood up as a whole, everybody, and said, we will not give you, we cannot afford to give you preemptive priority. That's number one. Number two, in order to get priority on a network, the device has to be able to talk to the signaling channel. Now, in an emergency, in a jammed network, the chances of getting on the signaling channel are few and far between. That's one reason why the federal government emergency voice system is not used very often in the United States. So those two reasons are the major reason. The other reason is the congestion. Again, we go back to a single cell sector. You have an incident in New York City, like that private airplane that hit the apartment. There's 50 reporters there. They all bring up a connection and they keep it open. You have all the residents of the building trying to talk to people. There's just not enough bandwidth. All right. So when we finally got that point just about nailed, there was an earthquake in Virginia, and everybody's cell phone in Washington, D.C. stopped working. Now, the cell sites were up. There was no damage to the cell sites. Sprint's sites were up. AT&T's were up. Verizon's were up. Nobody could get through because everybody was trying to get through. That was the biggest change that we had from Congress, and it was very nice to it. I mean, it's a shame that we had an earthquake, but it really drove the point home.
Okay. And Andy, there's something else that was in the news today that I wanted to ask you about and find out if you see a connection here. And that is the broadcast emergency alert system, the mobile emergency alert system. Is that meant to be connected at all to a public safety network? I know that's certainly the way that a lot of us would find out about a national emergency.
My understanding, and I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that is an alert system for the general public. And I'm sure it will be monitored by PSAPs and people like that. But I don't believe that will be transferred to the individual first responders' handsets. I may be wrong, but my view is that that's for the general public, and really the next generation 911 centers will have more to do with that than the LTE broadband.
Right. Well, I would expect if anybody knows what's going on, it would be you. So we'll take your word on that one. Okay, I would like to talk a little bit to each of you about your perspective on the municipalities. I think at the end of the day, a lot of this does play out at the local level. And Andy, I know that you have talked to a lot of local first responders and local governments about their perspective on this. So can you start us off?
Yeah, well, the way the law reads, FirstNet deals with the states. And the states are meant to put infrastructure in to deal with the municipalities. I'm not sure that that's the best model that we could have invented, but it's the model we have, and it's the model we have to live with. There is a lot of tension, believe me, in a lot of states between municipalities and states, and I'm sure you know there is. This has to, the first thing that has to happen in my mind is that FirstNet has to stand up and has to make two distinctions about this network. First of all, it's a nationwide network, and the technology will be managed through the FirstNet channels. Secondly, the operational part of this network must be, absolutely must be, managed on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. We have to make that distinction very quickly. Otherwise, we got a lot of municipalities who think that they can't change the quality of service. They can't change the priority. They can't change what units are on their network. They have to have the confidence that, you know, public safety has always wanted to own their own infrastructure. They've always owned their own infrastructure. This is brand new for them. They have to come into this comfort zone, and they have to come into it very carefully, and it's going to be a learning experience.
Okay, great. All right. Now, James, do you spend any time talking to the local governments? Is this something that you'd like to comment on, or not so much?
Well, I think Andy nailed it. You've got everyone looking for a piece of the pie. You have, at the state level, you have cities, you have counties, and they all want as much money as they can get. Now you move up to the state level, and you've got the states going to the Fed looking for as much money as they can get. So I totally agree with Andy. It's going to be challenging, but it works out in the end. So I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm kind of a glass half full kind of a guy, so I'm optimistic about how all this will work out.
Okay, Terrence, what about you? Glass half full?
Yeah, definitely glass half full. I think this is a very good time for all the users of this potential network to come together with their thoughts and make sure that all their needs are being taken care of. So I think the prior commentators hit it on the head. Excuse me.
Martha, can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk about all of the good things that PSCR and NIST and everybody else are doing. But I want to point out there's a huge amount of work being done in the Public Safety Committee. And National Public Safety Telecommunications Council, NIPSTIC, the APCO Broadband Committee, the Waiver Recipients Committee, the people that worked with the FCC on the original operations document. But NIPSTIC right now is working on a set of standard operating requirements that is the most thorough, the most complete document I've ever seen. It still needs more work, but it should be, and by the way, PSCR is very involved with that, as is DHS. But to me, that should be the Bible of what the public safety requirements are, and the network needs to be built. And that document, by the way, says these are must-haves at the beginning, these are nice-to-haves in the future, and this is something we would like to see in the further future. So it differentiates. So to me, it is a valuable resource.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left. Andy, are there any other topics that you'd like to see us cover today before we finish?
Well, I don't know. There's, the real issue here is we have the spectrum, we have the money, we have a governance organization, and by the way, I'm very pleased. The first responders, I know very well. I worked with them in the Public Safety Alliance. They're good people. Of the rest of the panel, I have worked with, and I know at least 4 of them. They are wonderful people. They're charged up, and they've faced challenges like this. They're going to get it done. So I think the biggest thing we need to do right now is let FirstNet do what they're going to do, see what it is. We might not always agree with it, but we got to give them the ramp to get this done. And the only thing that we should have talked about is the funding for the states. I think the funding for the states that was outlined at the APCO conference is way too long. 3-year, 5-year. That money should be made available immediately. 5 years from now, this network should be in the ground and operating, not just funding the states to do their studies.
Okay, now, as I remember, that's not a lot of money, though, for the states. Am I wrong about that? Is there a lot of money coming to the states, just not right away?
No, it's under $200 million. I don't remember the exact
Oh, yeah, I
number.
thought it was, yeah.
Okay, but it's designed to help the states put into operation their planning programs so that they can respond to FirstNet's requirements and say, this is what we need for our state. And that money, with all the states and all the money problems they're having, that money needs to get into their hands sooner rather than later.
Are you concerned that some of the states will just opt out and try to go it alone?
You know, I got right in the middle of this opt-out thing, all right? First of all, you can't opt out now because there's nobody to opt out to, all right? Second of all, it's prescribed by law when you can opt out. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding. I've had states call me up and say, we can opt out, we can lease the spectrum, and we can put billions of dollars in our state treasury. Wrong. The law says if you opt out, you build the network, but every penny that comes into that network goes to FirstNet, not to the state. And once the state understands that this is not a gold mine for them to pick at, then they look and they say, okay, let's see what's going to happen.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, James Silk, any last words or anything that you'd like to discuss that we haven't so far?
You know, I think what we're looking at right now with what we have deployed, we've got a lack of capacity, poor interoperability, poor functionality. Where we intend to go would be a network where you can roam from one municipality to the next, from one country to the next. And we certainly have a lot to do, but I mean, like organizations like Terrence's Sprint, the other network operators, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, I think so much of what happened there is a leg up on where we're going. So I think I'm very optimistic about it. You, like Andy said, you have the buy-in from the first responders. You've got folks that want to see this successful and want to make it successful. So I think we're going to see things sooner rather than later. Like I said, I'm very optimistic about it.
Okay, well, it certainly is important work. James Silk, Product Marketing Manager of Handheld Devices for Rohde Schwarz. Terrence, do you have any last words or anything you'd like to discuss that we haven't so far?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that, you know, we share the vision for FirstNet here at Sprint, and anything that we can do to help progress this, we're definitely going to do, and we believe that a lot of that is based on our understanding of public safety. So we look forward to the opportunity to compete, and we look forward to the opportunity to help FirstNet realize this goal. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Terrence. Terrence Brooks, Director of Custom Solutions at Sprint. Gentlemen and Kelly, thank you all for joining us on the webcast today. Thank you for joining the RCR Mobilist series. This will conclude our webcast. Thank you.